Good evening, everybody, and welcome. Tonight, we're going to be exploring some quite gruesome tales. No, nothing, gratuitous, you could say. Rather, a look at the dark. Let's shine a light into that twisted forest of urban myth and legend, the campfire stories that we tell, surrounded by friends, because we know that if it was just us, might seem a bit too real. The first legend we're going to look at is that of the hitchhiker. Now, anybody who's anybody has heard the story. Driving alone at night, a dark road, just maybe street light every couple dozen miles. And as you're driving, you see a figure, dark, dirty, ragged, sticking their hand out, looking to get a ride. And they say, give a ride to this person, take them to where they ask, you just picked up a spirit, my friend. However, this ain't no friendly ghost. Story goes, if you speak to the hitchhiker, ask them questions about who they are, why they're traveling, how their clothes got torn, stained, they might not leave you alone after you drop them off. They say if you ask them too many questions, they might just come back for you. No, not because they forgot their jacket or because maybe they had a little bit of cash in their pocket and they were willing to thank you. No, it's not that kind of story. When they come back, they're taking you with them. And I think both of us know that where you're going, let's just say the living aren't welcome. I heard this story growing up. There used to be this old house down the road from mine. It had been abandoned for about 50 years. The family used to live there, still owned it. It was said that if you picked up a stranger at night, picked up this spirit, that it was the spirit of a young girl who had died, and that if you took her back to that house, then she could finally pass on. Of course, who's gonna pick up someone who looks like a corpse? However, as per the rules, you could say the rules rather, most people asked too many questions. Questions that they had no right knowing the answers to. That family, a couple of years ago, decided to tear down that house. I swear to you, as I was coming here myself, traveling along all that way, dead of night, as a train went down the tracks in the subtle motion, I looked out the window, and under that street light I saw her waving at me as I came out of Philadelphia. Now, excuse me, there are, of course, many versions of this tale all over the country, hell, the world. I don't think that there's any town that doesn't have at least one urban legend, one story of an axe murderer, or perhaps a ghost of a soul who found it hard in life and harder in death. But not all legends are human. Not every tale is something we can explain through what we know. Well, what little we know of the afterlife, of death, of the world we live in. I heard this story once when I was in Salem, Massachusetts. I know, sounds a bit corny, but story goes that every year, the fall, you live in Salem, you see a man walk alone at night. Maybe you see it in the forests or the streets. Maybe in your own front yard, outside your window. This ain't no ordinary man, though. They say that this man is older than time himself, or that this man is some sort of vengeful being, misplaced spirit. I couldn't tell you for sure. But they say if he appears outside your house, and this man in all black, wearing the pale, bone white, bird-beaked mask, you see him on your front porch, backyard, you might just end up with a bit of a sickness there. Supposedly, he even carries a bubonic plague with him. In the residence he visits, members of that house will succumb to the plague after 5 days. It is because of the plague that the doctor gets his victims. Because death isn't the end for him. No. See, the doctor still believes he can cure these victims, especially if they're still alive. After the 3rd day, he will appear inside the house, often at night in the room of the person who first became sick. And every night he will begin to torture them, change them. And when they die, they walk again, mindless, soulless, without even single semblance of thought. You see, these creatures only listen to the doctor, the good doctor. And it's said, once fall turns to winter, these bodies finally rest. At least until the next year, when the doctor comes to claim more victims. Well, now that we've spoken about some more of the urban, some more of the word of mouth, the dark that lurks this time of year in the hearts and minds of communities, I'd like to bring it back a bit. There is a lovely story by horror author Mr. Neil Gaiman. This story is called Click Clack, the Rattled Bag. Let us begin. Before you take me up to bed, will you tell me a story? Do you actually need me to tell you a story before I take you up to bed? I asked the young boy. He thought for a moment, and then with intense seriousness, yes, actually, I think you do. It's because I've finished my homework, and so it's my bedtime, and I'm a bit scared. Not very scared, just a bit. But it is a very big house. Lots of times the lights don't work, and it's sort of dark. I reached over and tousled his hair. I understand that. So it is a really big house. He nodded. We were in the kitchen, where it was light and warm. So I put my magazine down on the table and said, "What kind of story would you like me to tell you?" "Well," he said thoughtfully, "I don't think it should be too scary. Because then, when I go up to bed, I'll just be thinking about the monsters the whole time. But if it isn't a little bit scary, then I won't be interested. You make up scary stories, don't you?" "I know she says that's what you do." "Well, she exaggerates. I write stories. Nothing that's been published yet, though. And I write lots of different kinds of stories." "But do you write scary stories?" "Of course." The boy looked up at me from the shadows by the door, where he was waiting. "Do you know any stories about Click Clack, the rattle bag?" "I don't think so. Those are some of the best sorts of stories." "Do they tell them at your school?" He shrugged at me. "Sometimes." "What's a Click Clack the Rattlebag story?" He was a precocious child and was unimpressed by his sister's boyfriend's ignorance. You could see it on his face. "Everybody knows them." "Well, I don't," I said, trying not to smile. He looked at me as if he was trying to decide whether or not I was pulling his leg. He said, "I think maybe you should take me up to my bedroom, and then you can tell me a story before I go to sleep. But not a very scary story, because I'll be up in my bedroom then, and it's really dark up there too." I said, "Should I leave a note for your sister, telling her where we are?" "You can, but you'll hear when they get back. The front door is very loud." We walked out of the warm and cozy kitchen into the hallway of the big house, where it was chilly and draughty and dark. I flicked the light switch, but nothing happened. "The bulb's gone," the boy said. "That always happens." Our eyes adjusted to the shadows. The moon was almost full. Blue-white moonlight shone in through the high windows on the staircase, down into the hall. "We'll be all right," I said to him. "Yeah," the boy said soberly. "I'm very glad you're here." He seemed less precocious now. His hand had found mine, and he held on to my fingers comfortably, trustingly, as if he'd known me all his life. I felt responsible and adult. I did not know if the feeling I had for his sister, who was my girlfriend, was love. Not yet. But I liked that the child treated me as one of the family. I felt like his big brother. I stood taller, and if there was something unsettling about the empty house, I wouldn't have admitted it to him. The stairs creaked beneath the threadbare stair carpet. "Click-clacks," said the boy, "are the best monsters ever." "Are they from television?" "I don't think so. I don't think any people know where they come from. Mostly, they come from the dark." "Well, that's a good place for a monster to come." "Yeah, We walked along the upper corridor in the shadows, walking from patch of moonlight to patch of moonlight. Allowed me to realize just how massive this house was. Made me wish I had a flashlight. "They come from the dark," said the boy, holding on to my hand. "I think probably they're made of dark, and they come in when you don't pay attention. That's when they come in, but then they take you back to their not nests. What's a word that's like nests but not? A house? No, it's not a house. A lair?" He was silent. Then, "I think that's the word. Yes, lair." He squeezed my hand, and then he stopped talking. "Right, so they take people who don't pay attention back to their lair. And what do they do then? Your monsters. Do they suck all the blood out of you like vampires?" He snorted. "Vampires don't suck all the blood out of you. They only drink a little bit, just to keep them going. And flying around. Click-clacks are much scarier than vampires." "I'm not scared of vampires," I told him. "Me neither. I'm not scared of vampires either. Do you want to know what click-clacks do?" "They drink you," said the boy. "Like a Coca-Cola?" "Coke is very bad for you," said the boy. "If you put a tooth in Coke, in the morning it will be dissolved into nothing. That's how bad Coke is for you and why you must always clean your teeth every night." I'd heard the Coke story as a boy and had been told as an adult that it wasn't true, but I was certain that a lie which promoted dental hygiene was a good lie, and I let it pass. "Click-clacks drink you," said the boy. "First they bite you, and then you go all ishy inside, and all your meat and brains and everything except your bones, and your skin turns into milkshakey stuff, and then the click-clack sucks it out through the holes where your eyes used to be." That's disgusting," I told him. "Did you make it up?" We'd reached the last flight of stairs, all the way in the big house. "No. I can't believe you kids make up stuff like that." "You didn't ask me about the rattle bag," he said. "Right. What's the rattle bag?" "Well," he said, sagely, soberly, a small voice from the darkness beside me. "Once you're just bones and skin, they hang you up on a hook, and you rattle in the wind." "So, what do these click-clacks look like?" Even as I asked him, I wished I could take the question back and leave it unasked. I thought, huge, spidery creatures, like the one I saw in the shower that morning. I'm terrified of spiders. I was oddly relieved when the boy said, "They look like what you aren't expecting, what you aren't paying attention to." We were climbing wooden steps now. I held on to the railing on my left and held his hand with my right. As he walked beside me, it smelled like dust and old wood that high in the house. The boy's tread was certain, though even the moonlight was scarce. Do you know what story you're going to tell me to put me to bed? He asked. It doesn't actually have to be scary. Not really. Not yet. Maybe you could tell me about this evening. Tell me what you did. That won't make much of a story for you. My girlfriend just moved into a new place on the edge of town. She inherited it from an aunt or someone. It's very big and old. I'm gonna spend my first night here with her tonight. So I've been waiting for an hour for her and her housemates to get back with the wine and Indian takeout. See? Said the boy. There was that precocious amusement again. But all kids can be insufferable sometimes. When they think they know something you don't. It's probably good for them. You know all that, but you don't think. You just let your brain fill in the gaps. He pushed open the door to the attic room. It was perfectly dark now, but the opening door disturbed the air. I heard things rattle gently, like dry bones in thin bags, in the slight wind. Click, clack, click, clack, click, clack, like that. I would have pulled away then if I could, but small, firm fingers pulled me forward, unrelentingly, into the dark. Well, that one was unexpected. This next one, well, you've probably all heard of it, in fact. Anybody who's seen a horror movie in the past 6 or so years has heard of The Conjuring. They've heard of Annabelle. And in all of these movies, The Conjuring, Conjuring 2, and of course the Annabelle movies, there's the claim that this is based on real events. Now, keen viewers of the Conjuring movies will notice that in Ed and Lorraine Warren's home, they keep a collection of items that are said to be haunted or to have been involved in some sort of ritual. This is in fact true. And the Annabelle doll, even to this day, is locked up in that room. It sits behind a glass case that says, "Do not touch, do not speak to Annabelle, do not mock the doll." Now, it wouldn't necessarily be out of the norm to assume that this was just for show, to sort of drill in the inherent creepiness of this lifelike doll. However, in real life, this doll isn't so lifelike. In fact, it's sort of comical when you look at it. The Annabelle doll, in reality, is an old Raggedy Ann doll. A doll that was very popular in the early to mid 20th century. Simple little girl's doll. She even had her own partner like Barbie does, Raggedy Andy. Now, Raggedy Ann, or specifically Raggedy Annabelle, has been involved in similar sort of circumstances as the movie proclaims. The Warrens did, in fact, find the doll at the home of some individuals who themselves had found it in a closet of an apartment they recently moved into. From there on, the doll would move. It would leave notes, scrawlings on the walls on occasion. And of course, they believed at first that the spirit was benevolent. Then started to go wrong. Things started to be thrown, moved. It was peculiar for these two young individuals having to live in this house where this albeit adorable doll seemed to be the host of something not so nice. Donna, who owned the doll, would like to leave it around the home, on her sofa or her bed, as such a cute little doll was a nice little accessory, something sweet to see when you come home. This changed when she received a note on her bed that said, "Help me." Neither of the roommates were in the home when this note was placed. All the doors and windows were locked, and they were the only ones with the keys. Now, of course, you receive a mysterious note saying, "Help me." One might be a bit prompted to investigate, maybe to even ask for more. But this wasn't the end, of course, no. One day, one of the roommates had her boyfriend over, and he was in the house by himself for a small amount of time. And at this point, he heard some rustling and banging, some loud noises, of course, coming from Donna's room. Now, if you're alone, of course, you're thinking to yourself, this has to be a break-in. Somebody's trying to steal my friend's stuff. However, when he investigated, nobody was there. Not in the closet, not under the bed. The only thing he found was the Annabelle doll, lying face down on the ground. When he went to reach for it, it said that he felt the searing pain of claws digging into his chest. Only 2 days later, they completely vanished without a trace. After this, they had a medium come into the house to investigate. attempt to figure out what was going on. The medium then held a seance. As a result of this, they discovered that the doll was haunted, of course, by the spirit of a young girl who had died in that house, rather. This girl, coincidentally, was named Annabelle. Although the medium claimed that the spirit was benevolent and simply wanted to be cared for, current evidence seemed to, point otherwise. Despite this, the two young nurses decided to help the doll by allowing it to stay there. The Warrens believed that this was sort of when the trouble started. By allowing the doll to stay there, and by extension, the spirit, they were unwittingly inviting something into their home. According to the Warrens, this young girl, this young spirit, was in fact a demon in search of a human host. Now, despite the Warrens' investigation, the haunting of Annabelle did not cease. Rather, it just changed locations. You may recall when I mentioned the sign that says, "Do not mock the doll." This is for good reason. You see, though the spirit may be bound to the doll, this does not mean it cannot inflict its will upon the world around it. No, of course not. Now, this started when the Warrens took the doll from the home. On the way there, the Warrens claimed that the brakes on their car either stalled or failed several times, which resulted in numerous crashes. Lorraine claimed that when Ed pulled holy water from his bag and doused the doll in it, the problem with the brakes disappeared. Originally, they allowed Annabelle to simply sit on a shelf in this portion of the home. However, when she began to turn up at different locations inside the home, other than the room that she was locked in, they decided to put her in a special glass case. Inscribed in this case was the Lord's Prayer and Michael's Prayer, and for the rest of his life, Ed Warren would periodically say a binding prayer over the case to ensure that the spirit and the doll remained trapped. Since being locked up, the doll hasn't moved, but as I said before, they say that the spirit itself has found its own way of getting around. A priest who visited the Warrens Museum picked up the doll and mocked it, saying that such a doll could not truly hold a demon. This was despite Ed and Lorraine Warren warning him not to do so. On his way home, the priest was involved in a near-fatal crash that ended up totaling his car. He claimed that just before he crashed, he saw Annabelle in his rearview mirror. Years later, there was yet another visitor who mocked the doll, laughing at it, saying people were silly to believe that this little doll could have such horrible, horrible force inside of it. On his way home, he lost control of his motorcycle, crashed headlong into a tree. He was killed instantly, and the passenger, his girlfriend, only barely survived. She claimed that at the time of the accident, they'd been laughing about the doll to themselves. Ed and Lorraine Warren consider these moments proof of the horrors of Annabelle, of the haunting of Annabelle. Strangely, however, in the Warrens' file regarding Annabelle, the individuals who have suffered at her hands are only given first names or even go unnamed, such as the priest, who is Annabelle's first victim, and the motorcyclist, the second. So, it would not be so far to assume that, given the evidence, the only person, or rather the only people who can even say anything about the doll even happened are Ed and Lorraine Warren themselves. Sadly, both have departed this mortal plane, last I checked. So I don't think we'll ever get a true answer. Just try not to mock any dolls. Okay? Well, since we're already on the topic of real stories behind some of the spookiest movies of the era, let's turn to what many may consider to be the first horror movie to truly scare the modern audience. The Blair Witch Project. Now, many of us listening may not remember, but when the Blair Witch Project came out, it was a massive deal. It wasn't just a movie. It wasn't just a documentary, no. It was the real story about 3 people who went into the forest to investigate a legend, make a documentary, and who never made it home. Websites were put up. News articles were written. Journal entries posted. The company who produced the film put all their effort into making sure audiences believed that the three people, the three actors involved in the Blair Witch Project were truly dead. The actors even received sympathy cards to their homes or the homes of their parents. They even received phone calls to the residences of their parents or friends and family to ensure their well-being. Now, of course, this isn't what's truly scary about the Blair Witch Project. No. What inspired the Blair Witch Project, or what is said to have inspired the Blair Witch Project, is where the terror comes in. In the South, there is the legend of the Bell Witch. It is said that in the early 1800s, a man named John Bell moved his family from North Carolina to the Red River Bottomland in Robertson County, Tennessee. Settling in that community, which became Adams many years later, Bell purchased some land and a large house for his family. Over the next several years, he acquired more and more land at max, eventually owning 328 acres, and cleared a number of fields for planting. He was also made elder of the Red River Baptist Church. The Bells had 3 more children after moving to Tennessee. Elizabeth was born in 1806, Richard in 1811, and Joel in 1813. One day in 1817, John Bell was inspecting his cornfield when he encountered a strange-looking animal sitting in the middle of a corn row. Shocked by the sight of this creature, which seemed to have the body of a dog yet the head of a rabbit, Bell shot it several times. The animal vanished, and Bell thought nothing more about it. At least, not until after dinner that evening, when the Bells began to hear beating sounds on the outside walls of their log house. The mysterious sounds continued with increased frequency and force each night. Bell and his sons often hurried outside to catch the culprit, but always returned empty-handed. In the weeks that followed, the Bell children began waking up frightened, complaining that rats were gnawing at their bedposts. Not long after that, the children began complaining of having their bed covers pulled from them and their pillows tossed onto the floor by a seemingly invisible entity. As time went on, the Bells began hearing faint, whispering noises. Too weak to understand, but they sounded like a feeble old woman singing hymns. The encounters escalated, and the Bells' youngest daughter, Betsy, began experiencing brutal encounters with an invisible entity. It will pull her hair, slap her relentlessly, often leaving welts and handprints on her face and body. The disturbances, which John Bell told his family to keep secret, eventually escalated to such a point that he decided to share his family trouble with his closest friend and neighbor, James Johnston. Johnston and his wife spent the night at the Bell home, where they were subjected to the same terrifying disturbances that the Bells had experienced. After having his bed covers removed, being slapped repeatedly, Johnston sprang out of bed, exclaiming, "In the name of the Lord, who are you and what do you want?" There was no response, but the remainder of the night was relatively peaceful. The entity's voice strengthened over time to the point that it was loud and unmistakable. It sang hymns, quoted scripture, carried on intelligent conversation, and once even quoted word for word 2 sermons that were preached at the same time of the same day, 13 miles apart. Word of this supernatural phenomenon soon spread outside the settlement, even to Nashville, where many people began to take interest. In 1819, Andrew Jackson, famed crazy person, racist, and overall bad guy, decided to visit the Bell farm after hearing the legends. When they approached the property, the wagon stopped. The horses refused to pull it. After hours of trying to get the horses to move, Jackson eventually yelled in frustration, and in response, a disembodied female voice told Jackson that they could proceed, and that she would see them again later that evening. They were able to proceed across the property, up the lane, into the Bell home. The men, once inside the home, waited hours to see if the entity would appear. One man began to taunt the entity, proclaiming that in his pistol was loaded a silver bullet that could kill evil spirits. Only moments later did he begin to writhe in pain and contort, screaming about being stuck all over his body, feeling pins and needles, as he began showing symptoms of being beaten severely. Moments later, a strong force threw him out of the home. After this, the rest of the men became frightened. However, Jackson refused to leave the home and refused to allow any of his men to leave as well. While they did leave the home, they did sleep not too far outside in tents. Nobody knows what happened that night, but the next morning, the group was spotted en route to Nashville. At one point, Betsy became engaged to a young man. However, the entity, for whatever reason, was not pleased with this and began more intensely harassing her, eventually culminating in her breaking off said engagement. After this, the hauntings became even worse, and the entity began to threaten John Bell's life, vowing relentlessly to kill him. Bell had experienced episodes of twitching in his face and difficulty swallowing for almost a year. And it seemed to grow worse with time. By the fall of 1820, his declining health had confined him to the house, where the entity commenced removing his shoes when he tried to walk, slapping his face when he experienced seizures. Her loud, shrill voice could be heard all over the farm, cursing and chastising old Jack Bell, as she often referred to him. John Bell breathed his last breath on the morning of December 20th, 1920, after slipping into a coma the day before. Immediately after his death, the family found a small vial of unidentified liquid in the cupboard. John Bell Jr. gave some of it to the cat, which died instantly. The entity then spoke up, exclaiming joyfully, "I gave old Jack a big dose of that last night, which fixed him." John Jr. quickly threw the vial into the fireplace, where it burst into a bright bluish flame and shot up the chimney. After the death of John Bell, the entity seemed to vanish. Later, in April of 1821, the entity visited John Bell's widow, proclaiming it would be back in 7 years. In 1828, it made good on that promise. John Bell Jr. became its next target. However, the entity seemed to visit him as opposed to being so malevolent as John Bell Jr.'s father was. Such a peculiar event is not often seen in the world of the paranormal. According to John Bell Jr., the entity would discuss things with him, such as the origin of life, civilizations, Christianity, and spiritual awakenings. The entity said farewell after 3 weeks, promising to visit John Bell's most direct descendant in 107 years. The year would have been 1935. The closest living direct descendant of John Bell at the time was a Nashville physician, Dr. Charles Bailey Bell. Dr. Bell himself wrote a book about the Bell Witch, published in 1934. No follow-up was ever published, and Dr. Bell died in 1945. To this day, these events do remain unexplained. However, the Bell home still stands on the same property. And it is believed that perhaps the entity still haunts those hallowed halls. Now, let us speak about something a bit more visceral. Everyone knows the story of Jason Voorhees. Everyone knows about the killer of Camp Crystal Lake. what many don't know is the story of the real killer, Camp Crystal Lake. Well, maybe the real Camp Crystal Lake might be a bit of a stretch, but there is a story from around 1960 from everybody's favorite Eastern European country, Finland. There was a camp where 4 teenagers had decided to spend some time. However, despite the gorgeous landscape, this was not to be a fantastic vacation for them. On Sunday, June 5th of 1960, 3 of the 4 campers were attacked and subsequently killed. The 4th managed to escape with only a fractured jaw and a concussion. Nobody truly knows what happened. Or at least, they didn't. Many suspects were questioned, from maintenance man, homeless man, and even an ex-KGB spy who happened to show up at the local hospital the day after the murders, covered in red stains. Even though one of the suspects happened to confess to the murders, sufficient evidence was never found. However, in March 2004, the sole survivor was arrested on suspicion that he was the killer, although he was inevitably acquitted. To this day, no one truly knows what happened. However, fear of the woods, and of some knife or machete or axe or even chainsaw wielding maniac is simply lurking in the shadows, waiting for us. Well, let's just say I don't camp by myself. Now, let's end on a bit of a light note. Have you ever heard the story of the Devil's Nightlight? No? Well, this isn't necessarily the kind of story you'd hear around the campfire or from some teacher or classmate or even the kid down the block. No. This is something otherworldly. Now, they say if you find a nightlight, small, with a red bulb and a smiley face on it, when you plug it in, turn it on, and lay your head down to sleep, you won't be alone. In the seat closest to your bed, a man will appear. Not just any man, though. This man will be wearing a dark cloak. And underneath the hood of said cloak, he will reveal his face red, with sharp fangs and 2 horns. Yes, the devil himself has come to visit. Now, from his cloak, he will pull a book, children's fairy tales, that he wrote himself. These fairy tales, of course, are similar to the ones you heard growing up. The stories of ugly duckling or Chicken Little. However, these stories are a bit more dark. Of course, the devil doesn't write for human children after all. However, they say that if you sit there quietly, listen to his stories, and eventually fall asleep, he will never haunt you again. And you will feel rested. However, any attempts to leave your bed or stop him from reading may result in less than favorable outcomes. Some say he simply takes you to hell. Others say he pulls you into the book to become a story yourself. Most will tell you that no matter what, he simply wants to read you a bedtime story. And that, dear listeners, seems to be the most unsettling part of it all. Thank you for listening to this very special episode of Disassembly Required. As always, I'm your host, Jolene. And remember, when you walk this Halloween night, whether it's trick-or-treating or going to a party, or, well, maybe even to get a little booze for that party, don't go alone. There's always something lurking in the shadows, in the trees, maybe even right behind you.